Commander Zekthor stood before the observation window of Coalition Station Harmony 7, his forearms crossed in a gesture that showed his impatience. His chitinous armor gleamed under the station's artificial lights, each plate a testament to battles won across 89 worlds. The Krillian warrior had seen more combat than most species experienced in 10 generations. 1,247 documented battles. Not a single defeat marked his record. The newest members of the Galactic Coalition had just arrived. Humans. Zekthor had reviewed their file with growing disinterest. They came from a world called Earth, a relatively peaceful planet by galactic standards. No natural armor. No fangs or claws. Their skin was thin, their bones fragile. They had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. The Krillian Empire had been the dominant military force in the Coalition for 3 centuries. Their warriors were trained from birth, their strategies studied by every military academy in known space. Zekthor himself served as the military liaison, advising new species on combat protocols and defense strategies. It was a position of great honor, one he had earned through countless victories. He watched as the human delegation's ship docked. The diplomatic reception would begin in one cycle. Zekthor prepared his formal greetings, already planning how quickly he could excuse himself from what promised to be a tedious affair. Soft species never interested him. They rarely lasted long in the Coalition anyway, usually requesting protected status and contributing little to collective defense. The reception hall buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species mingled. Zekthor towered over most of them, his height and build commanding attention wherever he moved. The humans arrived in small groups wearing simple uniforms that bore no obvious armor or enhancement. They smiled easily, laughed often, and seemed genuinely delighted to be there. Zekthor found himself approached by the human military representative, a female soldier who introduced herself as Sergeant Maria Chen. She was small, even by human standards barely reaching the middle of his torso. Her uniform bore several colorful ribbons and a few metal symbols, but nothing that suggested serious combat experience. "Commander Zekthor," she said with a slight bow. "It's an honor to meet the legendary warrior of the Krillian Empire. Your reputation precedes you." He returned the gesture with minimal effort. "Sergeant Chen, welcome to the Coalition. I trust you will find our protocols straightforward. Most species adapt quickly to our defensive strategies." "I'm sure we will," she replied. Her eyes held an unusual quality, something Zekthor couldn't quite identify. Not fear, certainly. Not awe, despite her polite words. Perhaps amusement. "We're actually hosting a cultural exchange presentation tomorrow. We'd like to share some of our history with the Coalition." Zekthor felt his mandibles click in barely concealed boredom. Another tedious presentation about primitive art or early space exploration. "Of course. I will attend if my schedule permits. We're focusing on military history," Chen continued. "Combat stories from Earth, nothing classified, of course. Just some context for how humans view warfare." That caught his attention slightly. Every species had war stories, usually exaggerated tales of ancient conflicts fought with primitive weapons. Still, it was more interesting than agricultural techniques or philosophical traditions. "Very well. I shall make time." Chen smiled, and again Zekthor noticed that strange quality in her expression. "Excellent. I think you'll find it educational, Commander." She paused, then added softly, "Humans have a unique perspective on combat. We've had a lot of practice." Later that evening, Zekthor found himself in conversation with Ambassador Cathrell, a Delphisian diplomat known for his extensive knowledge of Coalition species. The ambassador's translucent skin rippled with colors that indicated curiosity. "The humans seem pleasant," Cathrell observed. "Quite eager to integrate." "Soft," Zekthor replied. "No natural defenses. Limited physical capabilities. They will require significant protection if any conflicts arise in their sector." Cathrell's colors shifted to something resembling amusement. "I reviewed their preliminary data. Their planet is remarkable, Commander. Life there evolved in constant competition. Their predators are formidable. Their climate varies from lethal heat to deadly cold. They endured ice ages that should have caused extinction. Many species face harsh environments," Zekthor said dismissively. "It does not make them warriors." "True," Cathrell agreed. "But there is something else in their file. Something the initial contact team found disturbing. The humans have been at war for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts, Commander. Continuous warfare. They have never known a generation without combat somewhere on their world. Zekthor felt a flicker of interest. Civil wars? Common in developing species. Not just civil wars. Wars between nations, religions, ideologies. Wars over resources, territory, ideas. Wars that consumed entire continents and killed millions. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, then built thousands of them. Cathrell's colors shifted to something darker, and they chose not to use them, eventually. The Krillian commander considered this. Weapons of planetary destruction were not unknown, but most species developed such technology and immediately implemented strict controls. The idea of building thousands suggested a level of aggression that seemed inconsistent with the pleasant humans he had met. They seem peaceful now, Zekthor observed. They are, Cathrell said. The contact team's psychological assessment suggests they genuinely desire peace. But, Commander, they achieved peace not through evolution or philosophy, but through exhaustion. They simply ran out of enemies on their own planet. The report suggests they redirected their competitive nature toward exploration and science instead. Zekthor clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps the presentation tomorrow would be more interesting than he anticipated. Still, he had seen countless species try to impress the Coalition with tales of ancient glory. It never amounted to much. Real warriors were forged in actual combat, not in stories. The next cycle arrived quickly. The presentation was scheduled in one of the larger conference halls, and Zekthor was surprised to see it filling rapidly. Apparently, word had spread about the human military history presentation. Representatives from nearly every Coalition species had arrived, their curiosity apparently greater than his own. Sergeant Chen stood at the front with several other humans, preparing various display systems. Ambassador Rebecca Torres, the human diplomatic leader, stepped forward to begin. "Thank you all for coming," Torres said. "We want to share something important about humanity, not our technology or our culture in the traditional sense, but something more fundamental. We want you to understand where we come from and what shaped us. We're going to show you our combat history. Not to boast or intimidate, but because we believe context matters. You need to know who we are before we can truly be partners." The lights dimmed. Holographic displays activated, showing an ancient battlefield. Soldiers in primitive armor carrying shields and spears. Chen's voice provided narration. "This is Thermopylae," she said. "Over 2,000 years ago, 300 Spartan warriors and their allies held a narrow pass against an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They knew they couldn't win. They knew reinforcements weren't coming. They fought anyway. For 3 days they held that pass. When it was over, all 300 lay dead. But they had delayed the enemy long enough for their cities to prepare defenses." Zekthor watched with mild interest. A noble sacrifice, certainly. Tactically questionable, but every species had such stories. The display shifted to show another battle, this one more recent. Cities in ruins, soldiers fighting street by street. Chen continued. "Stalingrad, a city on our planet where a battle raged for months. Civilians fought alongside soldiers using whatever they could find. Kitchen knives, sharpened shovels. Soldiers shared single rifles, waiting for their comrades to fall so they could take their weapons. They ate leather boots to survive. The enemy controlled most of the city, but they never took it all. Every building became a fortress. Every room was paid for in blood." Zekthor felt his attention sharpening. This was different from the ancient tale. This spoke of desperation, of refusing to accept logical defeat. The holographic display showed the frozen ruins, the casualties measured in hundreds of thousands. More stories followed. The Alamo, where defenders fought to the last man knowing rescue would never arrive. Iwo Jima, where the casualties were so heavy that commanders questioned whether any objective could be worth such cost. Yet the humans had pressed forward, taking the objective despite losses that would have broken most species. The conference hall had grown very quiet. Zekthor noticed that several species were shifting uncomfortably. The Delphisian skin colors had turned dark. The Vryn representatives had pulled their sensory stalks close to their bodies in a defensive posture. Chen paused the presentation. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. "These aren't victories. Most of them aren't even tactical successes. They're just humans refusing to stop, refusing to surrender even when defeat was certain. You're right to be disturbed. We disturb ourselves when we look back at our history." The holographic display shifted again, showing a frozen landscape dotted with destroyed buildings and desperate soldiers. Chen's voice took on a harder edge as she continued the presentation. "The Chozan Reservoir," she said. "A human military force found themselves surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered them 10 to 1. The temperature dropped to -35 degrees. Men lost fingers to frostbite while firing their weapons. Equipment froze solid. Medical supplies ran out. They were told to retreat. The display showed soldiers marching through snow, carrying their wounded, fighting continuously." Chen smiled grimly. The commanding officer refused to call it a retreat. He said they were advancing in a different direction. For 17 days, they fought their way through enemy lines, taking their dead and wounded with them. They brought out their equipment. They destroyed enemy forces at every turn. When they finally reached friendly lines, they had suffered heavy casualties, but they remained an effective fighting force. Zekthor found himself leaning forward. The tactical absurdity of it was stunning. Any reasonable commander would have abandoned equipment and wounded to maximize escape velocity. Yet these humans had done the opposite, choosing to fight while burdened in lethal cold against overwhelming numbers. It defied every principle of military logic he had learned. "Let me tell you about individuals," Chen continued, "because that's where humans truly become incomprehensible to most species. This is Audie Murphy." The display showed a young man barely more than a juvenile by most species standards. He was 19 years old. His unit was being overrun by enemy forces supported by armored vehicles. Murphy sent his men to safety, then climbed onto a burning tank destroyer. Alone. The vehicle was damaged and might explode at any moment. For an hour, he held his position, using the tank's machine gun to fight off an entire company of enemy soldiers. He was wounded but refused to fall back. When his ammunition was exhausted and reinforcements arrived, he finally collapsed. The conference hall remained silent. Several species were now openly disturbed. A Vrin delegate's translator spoke up. "This cannot be standard human behavior. This must be an aberration, a mental defect perhaps." Chen shook her head. Murphy was one of thousands with similar stories. "Let me show you another. Desmond Doss." The display changed to show another young human. Doss was a combat medic who refused to carry a weapon due to his religious beliefs. During one battle, his unit was forced to retreat under heavy fire. Doss stayed behind. For 12 hours, he ran back and forth across the battlefield, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. 75 men. He saved 75 men while under constant enemy fire, without any way to defend himself except to keep moving. Ambassador Torres stepped forward. "I see the confusion on many faces. Let me be clear about something. These are not our most extreme stories. We have thousands more. Tens of thousands. Every human culture has similar tales. Warriors who fought until their bodies gave out. Civilians who took up arms when soldiers fell. Children who served as messengers through active combat zones. Elderly who refused evacuation and fought alongside the young." She paused, letting that sink in. "Our planet has seen continuous warfare for our entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts. Not border disputes. Continuous total war. We developed organized warfare before we developed agriculture. We were fighting each other with sophisticated tactics while still living in caves." Zekthor felt something cold settling in his core. He had fought across 89 worlds. He had seen species that lived for war, that celebrated combat, that trained every citizen as a warrior. But those species fought for territory, resources, honor. They fought with purpose and logic. What the humans were describing was something different. Something relentless and unreasoning. Chen advanced the display again. Roy Benavidez. During a rescue mission, he was hit by enemy fire before he even left his helicopter. Shrapnel in his face. He could barely see. He continued anyway. For 6 hours, he fought through enemy forces, pulling out wounded soldiers, calling in air support, fighting hand-to-hand when necessary. He was shot multiple times, stabbed, hit by more shrapnel. He refused to stop until every living soldier was extracted. The display showed medical records. Zekthor's translator struggled with the extent of the injuries. 37 separate wounds. Any one of several would have been fatal to most species. Benavidez had sustained them all and continued fighting for hours. When the rescue helicopter finally got him back to base, Chen said softly, the medical staff thought he was dead. They were preparing to put him in a body bag. He forced his jaw to move, spat in the face of the doctor to prove he was still alive. He survived. He lived another 25 years. Cathrell's skin colors had turned a shade Zekthor had never seen before. something between fear and fascination. The ambassador spoke carefully. These stories span different time periods, different cultures on your world. Is this persistence a genetic trait? Some evolutionary adaptation? No, Torres replied. It's cultural. It's taught. Every human child grows up hearing these stories. We teach them that giving up is worse than death. We teach them that protecting others matters more than protecting yourself. We teach them that the only unforgivable failure is to stop trying. She looked around the room. You asked why we're showing you this? Because you need to understand what shaped us. We didn't reach the stars because we're the smartest species. We didn't reach them because we're the strongest. We're not that either. We reached the stars because we absolutely refused to accept any limitation. Every barrier we encountered, we broke through or went around. Every setback made us more determined. Every failure taught us something we used to eventually succeed. The display shifted to show rapid sequences of human warfare through the ages. Ancient battles with primitive weapons, medieval sieges, naval combat, aerial warfare. The images moved faster, showing the escalation of human conflict. Weapons became more sophisticated. Battles became larger. The death tolls climbed into millions. 2 global wars, Chen said. Wars that consumed entire continents. Weapons that could level cities in seconds. Chemical weapons that caused slow, agonizing death. Biological weapons designed to spread disease. And then, the ultimate weapon. The display showed a mushroom cloud rising over a city. Even without context, every species in the room recognized the signature of atomic fission. Zekthor felt his breathing quicken. Nuclear weapons were known in the galaxy, but they were rare, carefully controlled, used only in the most desperate circumstances. We used them, Torres said quietly, twice on our own planet, on cities full of civilians. The death toll was immediate and horrific. The aftermath lasted generations. Radiation poisoning, cancer, birth defects. We saw what these weapons could do, she paused. Then we built more, thousands more, enough to destroy our entire planet several times over. For decades, we lived under the threat of total annihilation. Every human went to sleep knowing that war could end our species before morning. And yet we didn't use them again. Not because we couldn't, not because we were afraid to, but because we finally learned that some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Zekthor realized he was standing, though he didn't remember rising from his seat. You are saying your species possessed world-ending weapons and chose restraint, while still engaging in warfare? Yes, Torres confirmed. We fought wars with conventional weapons while keeping the nuclear arsenal as a deterrent. We developed rules for warfare, conventions, treaties. We limited ourselves even while fighting, because we learned that total war destroys everything, including the winner. We learned to fight with restraint, which is perhaps the hardest lesson any warrior species can learn. The implications crashed through Zekthor's mind like a physical force. These humans had not only survived their violent history, they had consciously chosen to moderate it. They possessed the capacity for total destruction and elected not to use it. That spoke to a level of collective discipline he had never encountered. But more disturbing was the realization that this restraint was a choice. It could be set aside. The capacity remained. The weapons existed. The knowledge of how to wage total war was still present in every human, passed down through their stories and their history. Chen advanced the display one final time. One more story before we break. I want to tell you about the Battle of Kamdesh, a small outpost at the bottom of a valley surrounded by mountains. Poor tactical position, easy to attack, 43 human soldiers stationed there. One morning, they were attacked by over 300 enemy combatants who had the high ground. The battle lasted 13 hours. The display showed the layout. Zekthor's tactical training immediately identified it as an impossible defensive position. Any force caught there should have been annihilated within hours. 27 soldiers wounded, Chen continued. 8 killed. The outpost was nearly overrun multiple times. Buildings were destroyed. Ammunition ran low. Medical supplies exhausted. And yet they held. They fought from burning buildings. They carried wounded under fire. They refused every opportunity to retreat. When reinforcements finally arrived, the enemy had withdrawn. 43 humans had held against 300 for 13 hours. The afternoon session had been worse. Chen and her team presented tactical breakdowns of human military operations. Zekthor watched as they explained concepts like acceptable casualties, strategic retreats that turned into counterattacks, and the doctrine of overwhelming force. What disturbed him most was how clinical the humans were about it. They spoke of their wars with the same detached professionalism he used when reviewing Krillian military history. But there was a difference. When Krillians discussed warfare, they spoke of honor and tactical brilliance. When humans discussed warfare, they spoke of necessity and survival. Every strategy seemed designed not to win gloriously, but to win regardless of cost. Now Zekthor stood in the simulation chamber, a spherical room lined with neural interface technology. Chen was making final adjustments to the system, her movements efficient and practiced. "The simulation will feel completely real," she explained. "Your mind will interpret the neural signals as actual experience. Pain is reduced to 10% of actual sensation, but you'll feel everything else at full intensity. Fear, exhaustion, desperation. The simulation includes fail-safes. If your stress levels become dangerous, it will automatically disconnect you." "I will not need fail-safes," Zekthor replied. His pride demanded confidence, even as a small part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. Chen nodded. "We'll start with World War I trench warfare. The Western Front, 1916. The simulation will place you in the role of a British soldier participating in an attack. It's historically accurate, based on thousands of documented accounts. You'll experience about 2 hours of compressed time, covering several days of actual combat." She paused, her expression becoming serious. "Commander, this isn't entertainment. This is what humans actually experienced, what we put ourselves through. If you want to stop at any time, just say so. There's no shame in it." Zekthor simply stared at her until she shrugged and activated the system. The neural interface engaged and reality dissolved. He was in a trench. The smell hit him first. Mud. Decay. Chemicals he couldn't identify. His forearms had become 2 human arms, his chitinous armor replaced by rough fabric and thin metal plating. The body felt fragile, vulnerable. He looked down at hands that seemed impossibly delicate. Around him, other soldiers huddled in the narrow trench. The walls were mud, reinforced with wood that looked rotten. Water pooled at the bottom. The sky above was gray and angry. The sound of distant artillery created a continuous rumble, like thunder that never ended. A whistle blew. The soldiers around him began climbing ladders, going up and over the trench wall. Zekthor's body moved with them, responding to trained reflexes that weren't his own. He climbed. He went over the top. The landscape beyond was hell. Mud stretched in every direction, broken by shell craters filled with water. Wire obstacles created tangled barriers, and everywhere bodies, some still moving, most not. The air was filled with the crack of rifles and the chatter of machine guns. Zekthor ran forward. The soldier beside him fell, hit by gunfire. Another fell, then another. The machine guns were cutting through the advancing line like harvesting equipment. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter. Every tactical instinct screamed at him to retreat, to find cover, to regroup. But the body kept moving forward. The soldiers around him kept advancing. They stepped over their fallen comrades. They pressed toward enemy lines that seemed impossibly far away. The rational part of Zekthor's mind couldn't comprehend it. This was suicide. This was madness. An explosion nearby threw him into a crater. Water and mud filled his mouth. He dragged himself to the crater's edge, gasping. The attack was failing. Bodies littered the ground. The survivors were falling back. Zekthor's body crawled through mud, pulling itself toward the relative safety of the trench line. He made it back, fell into the trench coughing mud and water. Around him, other survivors did the same. They had advanced perhaps 100 meters. The cost had been dozens of lives, and Zekthor knew with sick certainty that tomorrow they would try again. The simulation continued. Days compressed into minutes, attack after attack, each time climbing out of the trench, each time facing the machine guns, each time watching soldiers fall. The body became numb to it. The mind tried to protect itself by accepting the impossible as routine, artillery barrages that turned the world into earthquake and fire. Gas attacks that sent soldiers scrambling for masks, those too slow dying in choking agony, rats in the trenches feeding on the dead. The constant wetness, the cold, the smell of death that never went away. And through it all, the soldiers endured. They didn't flee. They didn't break. They stayed in those trenches and went over the top again and again. The simulation showed Zekthor's body participating in 7 attacks. 7 times climbing into certain death. 7 times somehow surviving to return to the trench. When the simulation finally ended, Zekthor found himself on his knees in the chamber, his breathing ragged. The neural interface disengaged slowly, reality reasserting itself in stages. He had his 4 arms back, his chitinous armor, his powerful Krillian body, but his hands were shaking. Chen was there with water. She didn't speak, just waited while he drank and tried to process what he had experienced. When he finally looked at her, she nodded slightly. That was 1 battle, she said quietly. 1 location on 1 front of 1 war. That war lasted 4 years. Similar conditions on multiple fronts. Millions of soldiers experienced what you just did. Many for the entire duration. And Commander, that wasn't even our worst war. That came 20 years later. Zekthor tried to speak, failed, tried again. How? How did they not all go mad? How did they continue fighting under those conditions? Some did go mad, Chen replied. We called it shell shock then. We understand it better now. Post-traumatic stress, psychological trauma. But most endured because they had to. Because their brothers were beside them. Because surrender meant their entire nation might fall. Because humans are very, very good at enduring the unendurable when we believe we have no choice. She offered him more water. That's why we're showing you this. Not to intimidate, not to threaten, but to give context. Every human alive carries the genetic legacy of ancestors who survived conditions like that, who faced impossible situations and found a way to continue. It's shaped how we think about problems, how we approach challenges. Zekthor stood slowly, forcing his breathing to steady. I want to see more, Chen frowned. Commander, I recommend waiting. Processing 1 simulation takes time. Your neural chemistry needs to stabilize. I want to understand, Zekthor insisted. Show me more. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Modern urban combat. This simulation is based on Fallujah 2004. Marines fighting through a city held by insurgent forces. Room-to-room combat. Civilian complications. Improvised explosive devices. Rules of engagement that limit how you can respond to threats. Zekthor climbed back into the neural interface chair. His pride wouldn't let him stop now, even though part of him desperately wanted to. Chen configured the new simulation, her expression troubled. This will be different, she warned. Urban combat is more personal. You'll see the faces of combatants. You'll make decisions about threats while trying to protect civilians. It's psychologically harder than trench warfare in many ways. The simulation engaged. Zekthor found himself in a destroyed building, carrying weapons he didn't know the names for. Other Marines moved with him, their movements precise and coordinated. The heat was oppressive. Dust filled the air. Every window, every doorway, every pile of rubble could hide an enemy. The fighting was constant but different from the trenches. Short, violent encounters, moving from room to room, clearing each space. The tension was unbearable. Waiting for the next attack, never knowing where it would come from. The rules of engagement meant he couldn't fire unless he confirmed a target was hostile. Insurgents used this, firing from locations near civilians, disappearing into crowds. Zekthor watched through his simulated soldier's eyes as a vehicle approached. Standard procedure said it might be a car bomb. It might be civilians. He had seconds to decide. The Marines waved warning signals. The vehicle kept coming. Was the driver ignoring them? Did they not understand? Were they hostile? The decision point passed. The vehicle stopped. A family emerged, terrified but unharmed. Civilians who hadn't understood the warnings. The Marines helped them to safety, then continued their mission. The constant uncertainty of threat assessment wore on Zekthor more than the trench warfare had. Every decision carried moral weight. Every choice could mean innocent deaths or the deaths of your own unit, an explosion. Improvised explosive device hidden in rubble. The Marine in front took the blast. Zekthor's body rushed forward to help. The wounded Marine was still alive, screaming. Blood everywhere. The medic worked frantically while others provided covering fire. They were exposed, under fire. The logical choice was to retreat and leave the wounded. They didn't retreat. They held position, fought off attackers, and evacuated their wounded comrade. It took 15 minutes of intense combat, 15 minutes where any one of them could have died. But they didn't leave him. The simulation continued for subjective hours. Building after building, contact after contact. The exhaustion was unlike anything Zekthor had experienced. Zekthor spent the next 3 days reviewing everything the humans had shared. Combat footage, tactical analyses, historical documents. Each piece of information confirmed what the simulations had taught him. Humanity was not a peaceful species that had achieved the stars through philosophy. They were a warrior species that had conquered their own violent nature through sheer exhaustion. He watched recorded interviews with human soldiers, veterans who spoke calmly about experiences that should have destroyed them. They discussed loss and horror with the same measured tone he used for tactical debriefings. But underneath he could see it now. The weight they carried, the choices that haunted them, the cost of their resilience. On the 4th day, Chen found him in the observation lounge staring out at the stars. "Commander, I wanted to check on you. The simulations can have lasting effects. How are you processing?" Zekthor didn't turn from the window. "I am re-evaluating everything I thought I understood about warfare. The Krillian Empire has been the Coalition's primary military force for 3 centuries. We pride ourselves on tactical excellence, strategic superiority, honor in combat. We have never lost a war." He finally looked at her. "We have never lost because we have never faced an enemy like you. An enemy that refuses to acknowledge defeat. That treats impossible odds as merely difficult. That will sacrifice everything to achieve objectives." Chen leaned against the observation window. "We're not your enemy, Commander. We never will be. But yes, you're right. If we were enemies, your tactics wouldn't work against us. Because Krillian warfare is based on rational actors making strategic calculations. Human warfare is based on the assumption that rationality fails when survival is at stake." "There is something else," Zekthor said slowly. "Something that disturbs me more than the violence. You showed me restraint. Modern human warfare operates under rules, conventions, limitations. You could fight without these restrictions, but you choose not to." "Why?" "Because we learned," Chen replied. "Total war destroys everything, winner and loser both. We learned that we could extinct ourselves very easily if we wanted to. We developed rules not because we became soft, but because we became wise. We fight with restraint now because we understand the alternative." She met his eyes. "But Commander, those rules are choices. They can be set aside if necessary. If humanity faces extinction, if we must protect our allies from total annihilation, we will set aside every restraint we've developed. We will become what we were, and that should terrify anyone who might threaten us or our friends." Zekthor felt that truth settle in his core. "Your species terrifies me, Sergeant Chen." She smiled slightly. "Good, that means you're paying attention. But remember, we're your terror. We're on your side. And that means no one else needs to be afraid of you, because humanity will stand with the Coalition against any threat." Zekthor turned back to the window. In the distance, Coalition intelligence had detected movement. The Zarfaxian swarm, a species that consumed entire worlds, that recognized no diplomacy, that simply expanded until stopped by force. They would reach Coalition space within 2 galactic cycles. Every military strategist in the Coalition was already running projections. The numbers were not favorable. "You know about the swarm," he said. "It wasn't a question." "We know," Chen confirmed. "Our intelligence services shared information with Coalition Command 3 days ago. We've been analyzing the data. They outnumber us significantly. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They consume resources and expand. They're an existential threat to every species in the Coalition." "The projections suggest we cannot win," Zekthor said quietly. "Not with conventional Coalition tactics. The swarm will overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers. They will accept casualties that would destroy morale in any rational species. They will continue attacking until they succeed." Chen was silent for a moment. "They sound familiar, don't they? A force that refuses to stop. That treats casualties as acceptable. That keeps coming regardless of losses. The Coalition has never faced an enemy like that. But humans have. We've faced enemies like that for our entire history, because we were that enemy. To each other." Zekthor felt understanding dawn. "That's why you showed us. That's why you revealed your history. You wanted us to understand what you could offer." "We wanted you to understand what we are," Chen corrected. "We can teach you how to fight like us. How to turn every soldier into someone who won't quit. How to make the enemy pay for every meter. How to fight when losing. How to continue when continuation seems impossible. We can teach you total war. but you need to understand what you're asking for. What it costs. Zekthor activated his communication device. I need to present this to the Krillian High Command. They need to understand what I've learned, what you're offering. 2 days later, Zekthor stood before the High Command on the Krillian homeworld. The council chamber was ancient, its walls carved with the names of victorious commanders spanning centuries. Zekthor's own name was inscribed among them. He had earned his place through a lifetime of success. Now he faced 7 senior commanders, the leaders of Krillian military forces. They regarded him with respect. He was legendary among their people. His tactical assessments carried weight. High Commander Vorthas spoke first. Zekthor, your report regarding the human species has been read. We find it disturbing. You recommend immediate military integration with a species that has been in the coalition for mere days. Explain. Zekthor straightened. I recommend it because the Zarfaxian swarm is coming. Our current projections give us a 37% chance of victory using standard coalition tactics. Those odds improve to 68% if we fully commit our reserve forces. But that assumes the swarm fights rationally. They will not. He activated a display showing swarm behavior patterns. They accept casualty rates that would break any civilized species. They continue attacking after losing 90% of assault forces. They do not retreat. They do not negotiate. They are the first truly irrational enemy the coalition has faced. And humans can help us fight such an enemy? Vorthas asked skeptically. Humans are such an enemy, Zekthor replied. Or they were. They have spent their entire evolution fighting each other. Total warfare. Continuous conflict. They developed strategies for fighting opponents who refused to surrender. Because they refuse to surrender. They understand this type of warfare at a fundamental level that we do not. Another commander, Kelvax, leaned forward. You experienced their combat simulations. Are they truly as capable as they claim? Zekthor hesitated. Admitting weakness did not come naturally. But they needed to understand. I have fought 1,247 battles. I have never known defeat. I have never felt fear in combat. The human simulations broke something in me. Not my courage. My understanding. I thought I knew what warfare meant. I was wrong. He let that statement hang in the air. Humans fight in ways that defy military logic. They continue after achieving tactical objectives becomes impossible. They endure losses that should destroy morale. They treat survival as optional if the mission requires it. And they have done this for thousands of years. It is not aberration. It is culture. It is identity. Vorthas clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. You are proposing we learn from them, that we adopt human military doctrine. I am proposing we learn from the only species in the coalition that has experience fighting an enemy like the swarm. Humans have fought themselves. They know how to combat an opponent that refuses rational defeat. They know how to turn populations into weapons, how to make every position a fortress, how to ensure the enemy pays an unbearable price for every victory. Zekthor activated another display, showing human combat doctrine. They call it asymmetric warfare. Defense in depth, strategic trading of space for time, turning every citizen into a potential combatant. Poisoning resources rather than allowing capture. Mining retreat routes. Fighting from rubble. Never surrendering. Never accepting defeat as final. This is barbaric, Kelvax protested. We are civilized warriors. We fight with honor. And we will die with honor, Zekthor replied flatly. The swarm does not care about our honor. They do not care about our civilization. They will consume our worlds and move on, unless we are willing to fight as humans fight. Without restraint, without mercy, with absolute commitment to survival. Vorthas raised a hand for silence. Zekthor, you are suggesting we fundamentally change how the Krillian Empire wages war, based on the recommendations of a species we met days ago. This is unprecedented. Yes, Zekthor agreed. It is unprecedented. So is the threat we face. The swarm is unlike anything the coalition has encountered. Our traditional tactics will fail. But humans have survived by developing tactics specifically designed to counter overwhelming force. They know how to win when victory should be impossible. He stepped forward. High Command, I have never been afraid of an enemy. But after experiencing what humans do to each other, after understanding what they are capable of becoming, I am afraid. Not of them. They are our allies. But I am afraid for anyone who becomes their enemy. I am afraid of what the swarm will face when humanity sets aside its restraints and becomes what its history made it. 6 months passed in a blur of training and preparation. Human military advisors spread throughout coalition forces, teaching tactics that seemed insane until you understood the philosophy behind them. Zekthor watched as his people changed. Krillian warriors who had fought for honor learned to fight for survival. Soldiers who retreated when logic demanded it learned to hold impossible positions. The Delphisian forces, traditionally defensive and strategic, learned to counterattack from positions already lost. The Vryn, who had always valued individual survival, learned to sacrifice units to protect larger objectives. Every coalition species studied human warfare and found it fundamentally opposed to everything they had believed about combat. And they learned. Because the alternative was extinction. Chen had been right. The training changed them. Krillian culture had always celebrated tactical brilliance and honorable victory. Now they celebrated endurance, persistence, the ability to continue when continuation seemed impossible. Songs were written about human battles. The defense of Stalingrad became required study. The story of Roy Benavides was taught to every recruit. Zekthor led the integration program personally. He trained alongside humans, learning their methods firsthand. He ran their simulations again and again until the horror became familiar. Not comfortable. Never comfortable, but familiar enough that he could function through it. The humans taught them strategies that defied military logic. How to poison your own territory rather than let it fall intact. How to turn retreat into counterattack. How to make the enemy fear advancing because every meter gained would cost them dearly. How to fight from the rubble of destroyed positions. How to continue after losing everything except the will to resist. And then the swarm arrived. They emerged at the outer rim, a wave of ships that blotted out the stars. Coalition intelligence had predicted the swarm would number in the tens of thousands. The reality was worse. Hundreds of thousands of swarm vessels, organic ships that pulsed with alien life, descended on the border colonies. The first contact was devastating. The swarm crashed against coalition defenses like a wave. They accepted casualties that would have broken any rational species. Ships destroyed by the dozens still pressed forward. They had no strategy beyond overwhelming force, no tactics beyond relentless advance. They simply came and kept coming until something stopped them. But coalition forces didn't break. They held positions that should have fallen. They counterattacked after being pushed back. They mined evacuation routes. They turned entire planets into traps, poisoning resources and rigging infrastructure to explode when captured. The swarm found no easy victories. They found an enemy that fought like nothing they had encountered before. They found an enemy that fought like humans. Zekthor commanded a defense force at the Kepler station, a critical supply hub. Intelligence predicted the swarm would bypass it, considering the defenses too strong to warrant the cost of assault. Zekthor knew better. The swarm didn't calculate cost. They simply attacked until they succeeded or were destroyed. Sergeant Chen was with him, commanding a human strike force integrated with his Krillian units. Together, they had prepared the station for siege. Not a defense designed to hold the station intact. A defense designed to make the swarm pay an unbearable price for taking it. The swarm arrived in overwhelming numbers. Thousands of ships against their few hundred defenders. The first wave crashed against the station's shields. When shields fell, the second wave hit the outer hull. When the outer hull breached, they flooded into the corridors and found every corridor mined, every junction trapped, every room a killing ground. The coalition forces fell back slowly, making the swarm fight for every meter. Sealed bulkheads that seemed like barriers were actually traps, funneling swarm forces into kill zones. Sections that seemed evacuated were rigged to explosively decompress when filled with swarm soldiers. Zekthor fought alongside Chen, their units working in perfect coordination. He had learned from her people. Learned to ignore casualties. Learned to continue when logic said retreat. Learned to make every loss count for something. The battle raged for 16 hours. The swarm took section after section, paying horrific prices for each advance. Coalition forces retreated through prepared positions, each fallback position turning into another defensive stand. Wounded soldiers continued fighting. Soldiers with empty weapons used them as clubs. Engineers detonated charges while still in the blast radius. Taking swarm forces with them, it was human warfare. Total, unrelenting, accepting no possibility of defeat. Finally, after 16 hours, the coalition forces reached the station core. The swarm had taken 90% of the station, but their casualties were staggering. For every coalition soldier that fell, dozens of swarm creatures lay dead. The station they had captured was a ruin, its resources destroyed, its strategic value eliminated. Chen stood beside Zekthor in the core command center, monitoring the swarm's advance. "Final defensive position," she said calmly. "We make our stand here. If they want this station, they'll have to dig us out." Zekthor checked his weapons. Both were nearly empty. His armor was breached in 3 places. One of his forearms was injured, barely functional. Around him, the remaining defenders prepared for what might be their final stand. "Reinforcements are 12 minutes out," Chen reported. "We need to hold that long." "Then we hold," Zekthor replied. It was what humans would say, simple, direct, accepting no other possibility. The swarm breached the core entry points. Zekthor fired until his weapon ran dry, then drew his blade. Beside him, Chen did the same. They fought in the ruins of their defensive position, surrounded by their people, holding ground that had no strategic value except the value of not surrendering. 12 minutes felt like hours. The swarm pressed inward. Coalition forces contracted into an ever smaller defensive circle. Zekthor found himself back-to-back with Chen, both of them still fighting, still refusing to fall, and then coalition reinforcements arrived. Fresh ships dropped into the system and began destroying the swarm vessels. Without their ships, the swarm forces on the station were trapped. Surrounded, cut off from retreat, they fought to the last creature anyway. Because the swarm, like humans, didn't know how to surrender. When the battle finally ended, Zekthor stood among the ruins of Kepler Station. The casualties were severe. 40% of the defending force dead, another 30% wounded. The station itself was a wreck, barely functional. By any traditional military assessment, the defense had failed, but the swarm had lost thousands. They had gained a strategic position only to find it unusable. They had learned that coalition forces would make them pay for every victory with blood and fire. They had learned, Zekthor hoped, that they faced an enemy that had learned from humanity. The war continued for months. Battle after battle followed the same pattern. The swarm attacked with overwhelming numbers. Coalition forces made them pay unbearable prices. Planets were scorched rather than surrendered intact. Populations evacuated while civilians who stayed fought alongside soldiers. Every position became a fortress. Every retreat became a counterattack. The swarm had never encountered an enemy like this. They had always overwhelmed opposition through numbers and persistence. But coalition forces, trained by humans, matched their persistence, exceeded it, turned the swarm's own tactics against them. Finally, after 9 months of brutal warfare, the swarm withdrew. Not defeated exactly, but stopped. They pulled back to regroup, to assess this enemy that fought with impossible determination. The coalition had held. At horrific cost, but held. Zekthor stood with Chen on the bridge of a damaged coalition warship, overlooking a field of debris. The evidence of the war floated around them. Destroyed ships, ruined stations. "The cost of survival, we held," Chen said quietly. "The swarm learned that the coalition won't break. That will make them pay for every meter. That victory against us costs more than most species can afford." Zekthor nodded slowly. "We became what you are. We learned to fight as humans fight. To endure the unendurable. To refuse defeat, yes," Chen agreed, "but at a price. Look around, Commander. This is what total war costs. This is why humans tried so hard to find another way. This is why we built rules and restraints. Because fighting like this destroys everything. Winner and loser both." She turned to face him. "You saved the coalition by learning from us. But now you carry what we carry. The knowledge that you can fight this way. That you can set aside every restraint. That you can become what survival demands. That weight never leaves you." Zekthor looked out at the debris field. In the distance, work crews were beginning recovery operations, salvaging what could be saved, honoring the dead, rebuilding, always rebuilding. "I understand now," he said. "Why you showed us your history. Why you revealed your capacity for violence. It was a warning and an offer. A warning that humans possess the ability to fight without restraint. An offer to teach us how to do the same." "Yes," Chen confirmed. "Because we wanted you to know what you were allying with. We wanted you to understand that humanity's greatest strength is also our greatest burden. We know how to survive anything. But survival costs. It always costs. Zekthor felt the weight she described. He had fought 1,000 battles before meeting humans,